So my name is Nariba Shepherd, and this is Terms of Service.
I'm Justin Arnett Graham. And this is Terms of Service.
Terms of Service.
Okay, that wasn't... That's really hard to do, you guys. I'm not Nariba. My name is Laura Louise Green. And Hassel and I are doing a Terms of Service takeover. Oof. Yeah.
Bucket list check.
Bucket list check.
Over Terms of Service.
We're both such big fans, and so we're really, really happy to be here doing this, and really grateful to the Terms of Service team.
Oh, absolutely.
For letting us hijack their platform.
I feel like I am nerding out on the space, on this conversation. So yeah, I'm Hassel Aviles. I am the co-founder and executive director of Not 9 to 5, a nonprofit organization coming at you from Toronto, Canada. Although I'm physically in Chicago today. Yeah, I am. I'm here. It's real.
It's real.
It turns out everyone's a real person. I thought they were just Instagram accounts and
we
Zoom
have
people.
Legs.
You have
and
legs.
Bodies.
I got to actually touch people, not inappropriately, like very friendly and with consent. But it's very exciting to be here, and we have special guests. So if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name's Hunter Cease. I work at a restaurant here in Chicago, and I'm excited to be on the podcast. This is my best friend's podcast, so I'm super stoked to be here.
Oh.
That's so nice.
Best friend is dying in the corner. Very excited.
My name's Alex Augustine. I'm a restaurant industry veteran and going to work for a wine company shortly, but just left the restaurant industry after about the last 15 years. So.
Cool.
I feel that.
And one of my best friends is also here somewhere in the room, so there we go.
It is an interesting jump going from restaurant and the on-premise and going into more of a wine supplier situation. It is kind of like one hot pan into another.
Oh, for sure. I'm super terrified, but I think I mentioned before, I'm super excited to be home when the sun is still up.
Right.
And experience that, which I've never gotten to do before, so it's going to be exciting.
You're going to learn so much about yourself.
Yeah, maybe more than I want to know, but I am excited for it. So,
well, we're so happy. We're so happy to be doing this. And what is this? We are going to be talking a lot about hospitality mental health, what it is. This is very much psychoeducation, of learning of like, what is mental health? It's very much this like ethereal topic that floats in and out of the minds and hearts of individuals in this industry, but it's a really complex conversation. It's like definitely not simple by any means. And so we're hoping with this to really demystify what is mental health, what impacts our mental health, and then what is the process within the hospitality industry that makes caring for our mental health so challenging.
Yeah. I also want to add that I think it's important to recognize that this is a very new conversation for this industry and hospitality. We've neglected this for centuries. And before we jump into the actual conversation, I also want to acknowledge that this is not, although we have a therapist here with us. Laura,
Yes,
you're a therapist.
I am a therapist.
This is not therapy.
But I'm no one's therapist. You know, I'm a trained psychotherapist, but I don't see clients anymore because I do the work with Healthy Poor. But this is not therapy, and this is not a replacement for therapy. This is not even what therapy looks like. You know, like it's not.
Yeah, and we want to really be clear about that, you know, so that as you're listening, you can walk away with really important information, some really interesting learning and education, maybe new words, new language for how to express certain thoughts, feelings, or experiences. But that this is for information purposes only.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, you know, you're listening to this on a device, on a podcast, and if it gets to be a little too much, like it's going to be natural to have, well, you all are trapped here, but I'm talking to you listening at home. But if it's going to be natural to have feelings of maybe like guilt and like, oh God, I do that. Oh, I participate in that. We're all complicit in this system that is so terribly problematic. every one of us. So you're going to have feelings that pop up. If it becomes unmanageable, just take a break. I would say give this a listen or two and take some notes, and then bring your notes to your real therapist. Not that I'm not real. You know what I mean.
Yes.
I'm just not your therapist.
You don't have the context of each individual
Hell
who's
no.
listening. And this is an offering to the terms of service community and the hospitality community at large. This is a way to normalize these conversations, break down the stigma, and offer different perspectives. And yeah, I mean, Laura and I, so full transparency, Laura and I have been having these conversations and doing presentations, workshops, and such for almost 2 years or more now. And so, when we approached terms of service, it was really about like, can we share this with more of your audience? And so thanks for joining us, Alex and Hunter. And I think we should jump in, Laura.
I'm going to pop open this Athletic Brewing Run
Cheers.
Wild IPA. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah. This is
Crispy.
good. Crispy indeed.
sounds like a commercial. Delicious.
Oh,
So, Laura, I think a lot of people, when they hear mental health,
yes.
have a different definition of it. What I think mental health is, Hunter might think different, Alex might have a different definition. So can you align us?
Yes. So also I'll say in research and study, there are all different definitions and everyone argues about it. It's
That's
great.
true.
It's not annoying at all. But my favorite definition comes from the World Health Organization. And I like it because it's very holistic in someone's experience. And when I say holistic, I mean like it's all encompassing and more global in someone's experience, not like holistic, like essential oils. I'm going to not go down that rabbit hole. So mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So nowhere in there do you hear anything about like your brain chemistry, even though that's a factor of it. It's really more about how are you relating to the world at large around you? And then how do you feel about that? What's your emotional life? Like even in the definition, it's like the normal stresses of life. It's not saying you should have no stress. It's, are we able to manage our stress? Do we have the resources to do that? We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but mental health is not like the absence of mental illness. And I think also people make the conflation of mental illness and mental health is the same thing, whereas mental health is your entire spectrum of how you feel, and it fluctuates in a day-to-day, and it's different. I'm going to use the physical model to just compare it. Like if you have an injury, like you break your arm, that's one thing. If you have a cold, it's still your physical health, but it's a different situation. It's an injury versus an illness, a sickness. And your mental health is the same way. There could be a lot of different things that happen or you see or experience. And our mental health is affected in a lot of different ways. Mental health is not being happy all the time. Also, what a curse that would be just to be happy all the time and to not feel the full scope of your emotional life. Our emotional lives are gifts, even when it doesn't feel great.
Well, and I think that's what makes toxic positivity so harmful,
Yeah.
right? I think oftentimes we're so forced into, I just remember as a server, like service with a smile. Like doesn't matter if your mom died yesterday or your dog's sick or you have to move in the morning and you're super
just gonna erase
stressed.
my emotional life, and
It's asking the impossible of people.
our emotions are there to warn us and direct us towards good things and, interrogate. So it's not if you're mentally healthy, you're not happy all the time. That's not what it is.
Right.
It's you can have an access to your full scope of emotional life. It's not limited to when issues arise. I would say that's one of my biggest pet peeve is too kind of how I feel about this. We talk about mental health and hospitality when someone dies, or it's when it should be a conversation all the time, even when things are working, when it's good. We're like, we should be talking about like, my mental health is in a really good place. What is happening in this space that's contributing to that? Not just the tough stuff.
Right. Or like only talking about mental health when you're in a crisis.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like Hunter and Alex, having heard what it is, what it's not, is that helpful?
I think so. I think being a little more specific about the scope of what falls under mental health and things like that, it's an important conversation to have to try to figure out how to help people, because it's a bigger issue, and it's not just one thing, and it's not an easy fix. It's kind of a multifaceted thing that you have to take a step back from and try to understand a little bit more about what the issues are before you try to help fix them, I think so.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's also helpful for both yourself, your employees, your coworkers. You never know what anybody could be going on outside of work, which is something that always needs to be thought about.
I agree.
I just want to say I have like a burp inside of me, and I really feel like Nariba right now.
If I know anything about Reba, she lets him out. So let it out.
I almost did, and I was like, how deep am I going into this takeover?
I mean, it is a delicious beer, so
I'm telling you, it's so tasty.
Maybe not. We'll just add that one in.
Just edit it out. Okay, cool. So I think the other thing that we have to talk about when we talk about mental health is what impacts our mental health, what's affecting our mental health. And the answer is literally everything. Like everything from moment to moment, what we see, what we feel, who we talk to, what the weather's, all of it is impacting our mental health all the time. So with that, I'll say every conversation we have around, let's say, DE&I, that's also a conversation about mental health. When we talk about systems within a restaurant and what are our standard operating procedures, those are also conversations in a lot of way about mental health, because that's influencing people's mental health and impacting it. So that's like work, home life, community, politics, our childhoods, what we're consuming, what we're eating, what we're listening to, all of that. But really it can be simplified when we talk about what impacts our mental health to like 4 things. So one would be social, like all the system around us, interpersonal, the interactions that we have with each other, and smaller groups like a restaurant, like an organization. Then biological pieces. So like what's happening in your brain? What are the chemicals? Is there brain injury? How does your body feel? Are you sleeping? Are there hormones that are going haywire? Are you, pregnant? That's all that stuff is also going to impact your mental health. And then experiential, the things that happen to us. And I think we make the mistake of only talking about mental health when it's like the brain stuff.
Right.
When it's like, oh, I am bipolar, or, I have bipolar 1, or they have a personality disorder. Like these disordered pieces really kind of like take the reins when we talk about mental health, when it's happening all the time. You don't have to have a disorder to tend to your mental health. I like to think of it, this is the analogy that just keeps on giving. It's like a house. So here we go, everybody. Hold on to your butts.
Okay, here we go, Laura.
So your mental health is like a house. You have a yard, you have a community, you have a city that you live in, or a town that you live in, and there's weather. So there's impact by who's around your house, and there's impact of what's happening if a tree falls down and goes through a wall. Oh my gosh, like it's not something that happened in the house, but it happened to the house. If it rains, if there's a big storm, if there's a lot of sun and the paint starts to dry and chip off or whatever. So those are things, these like social pieces that are more deterministic in a lot of ways that we can impact, because we go outside, but it's like happening to the house in a large social way. Then we also look at like, how is the house built? How is the integrity of the foundation? Is there mold in the walls? Are there animals living in there? Like, is it a glass house? Is it a brick house? Like, what is happening in that? And that's when we're looking at like our biological systems of, what are the circumstances of our biology, our body that makes our house what it is. So that could be a really strong foundation, or, it might be a little
lopsided.
Exactly.
It's a good word. So then there's the other piece of like, who do you let in your house? Do they stay too long? Are they invited? Do they keep it clean? Do they respect your space? and those are these interpersonal pieces.
Yeah. Who needs to leave?
Who needs to get the fuck out? Who needs to go? But like, we can really go deep into this analogy, and this is why I love it, is because like, when you have a nasty like leftover container in your refrigerator and you ignore it because you're like, I don't want to deal with that,
Gross.
Yummy.
and then it starts to smell, and then it stinks up your whole refrigerator, and then it stinks up your whole house. That can really mess with your living situation. And your mental health is the same way. If there's this festering problem that you're like, I'll get to it, that really starts to kind of take over, that's a problem. And what's great about therapy is your therapist is there to cheer you on as you clear it out.
Right. I also think, it's natural for avoidance.
For sure.
To be, for people to experience it. But you're right. At the end of the day, it is happening because something's wrong.
Yeah. And
right?
also
avoidance kicks in because something's wrong.
And because there's fear involved with it, for sure. But the last piece of this analogy that I'll bring into it is like, do you have all of your parents' old furniture in your house? Is that even how you want to decorate? Like,
That's a good analogy.
Who's leaving their shit around to mess with your house?
Yeah.
So that's really, you can see how holistic it is, really, of outside's affecting it, inside, the bones of it, all to create the question of, is my living space healthy? Do I like it? Does it reflect who I am, truly? And work is an element of that too. I call it your office space.
So work is obviously a huge part of our lives. And especially if you work in the hospitality industry, it often takes over your life. And so for me, the way I feel this and have experienced what you're talking about, Laura, is when I was a server and bartender working in restaurants for so long, for so many years, being told to check my shit at the door, being told to check my emotions at the door. I was told that at every single workplace except for maybe one. And now I realize, like, especially having this definition and this all explained to me, I now realize that that's an impossible ask. You can't ask someone to check their humanity at the door. Like, we're actually asking the impossible of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, how does this all land for you both?
I mean, I think it's one of the most unfair things you can ever ask of a person. And that is kind of the standard operating across all restaurants I've ever worked in, is like,
Same.
Hey, you're having a bad day, just leave it at the door and like come in and like you'll forget about it. And it's like, instead it's just buried inside of you, and then you get out of work and you're like, I'm gonna go home, it's 2:00 and I'm gonna go to sleep and wake up the next day and start the whole day, and
That's
you never
right.
really addressed any of the issues, and you're not talking about it, you're not being allowed to express the things that you're putting down, and then it kind of just compiles on top of each other. So it's not a great thing.
That, or you're getting out at 2 a.m. and the first thing you think of is going to the bar down the block.
Yep.
And then you never really handle it because it never gets dealt with. So I guess when we talk about checking your emotions at the door, one specific story of mine last year, not necessarily a negative story in the light that my bosses were there for me in this case, but my grandfather had just passed away. It was December, which was, it's always a hard one around Christmas, but I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to come to work. I drove to work anyways because I'm a crazy person. And I sat in my car and cried for about 30 minutes to an hour, and I called my boss and was like, hey, like, I don't think I can do this. And he was like, then why did you even come to work? He was like, go home and deal with it, man. Like, there's no reason that you should feel like you have to overcome emotions especially through a death, to feel like you need to check those emotions at the door. Checking the emotions at the door is one thing when you're dealing with smaller things outside of work, pettiness, some rumors, some talk around the town or whatever it may be. But when it comes to like whether or not you're going to be able to perform at your best, there's no reason you should ever feel like you need to be there.
Yeah, and I think
That's
of
right.
like all the years I spent working to avoid what was happening in my life. Like, I'm just going to stay at work and not go home and deal with this relationship. Or, like it can very easily become a coping strategy, loose word, strategy.
But I also think it's so dangerous and irresponsible of a workplace to encourage you and demand you to repress and suppress your emotional experiences.
It is. Yeah. And it's
you
also
know?
like, this is emotional work. When you're putting love into the food that you're making or you're engaging with the guest, like it's the difference between just service and hospitality. Hospitality is a collaboration, and I think actually level of hospitality is reliant on the guest's view of the individual's humanity who's taking care of them. I could go off on that, but you have to have a grasp of your emotional life to really provide hospitality. Otherwise, it's service. Those are different things. So for us to tell people, like, you aren't allowed to feel things, you're not allowed to express it, you're not allowed to, like, dig into your own humanity and cherish your own humanity in this work, it's not hospitality anymore. It's exploitation, and it's real fucked up. That's a clinical term.
Yeah. Well, we try to avoid the clinical language here. But you just reminded me of something else, just in case anyone's listening and misunderstands what we're trying to share here is it also doesn't mean that you go into work and spill.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Boundaries.
So this is where boundaries come in. Yeah, exactly. Like, I think acknowledging that you have emotional experiences, acknowledging what mental health is or is not, acknowledging how to improve workplace mental health does not mean share your traumas at work, right? Does not mean open up your wounds for each other.
No matter how bored you are behind the bar. Like, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been there.
Yeah, that's such a good point. The boundaries around how we're feeling. It's more because it becomes really about emotional management and like this sort of regulation of, having a relationship with yourself enough that you're able to recognize how you're feeling and starting to really piece together why, and then saying, okay, within the context of this is what I'm bringing to it. And,
I feel like this is the perfect segue into stress and the conversation of stress.
Yes.
So can you define stress for us, Laura?
Yes. So stress is defined as any type of change that causes physical, emotional, or psychological strain. Stress is your body's response to anything that requires attention or action. So stress, we experience stress. Our heart rate increases, our adrenaline increases, we start to sweat cognitively in our brains, and how we start thinking, it gets a little foggy. Like, I call it like pinhole thinking, that you can focus hyper on one thing and only one thing, and everything else goes like womp, 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 womp. And the reason that's happening is because we are coming into contact with a stressor. And a stressor is the thing that our bodies have realized that we don't have the skills or ability to really manage in the moment. And it's a danger indicator of like, I don't, like, ding, 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 I don't know how to do this. And your body's saying, we are going to equip you with all of this adrenaline and all of this energy, because stress builds energy, to get away or fight what's happening. That's where we start seeing like fight, flight, and fawn stuff. But stress gets such a bad rap because it's really it's our friend. And we read all this stuff that's like, how to eliminate your stress. Hell no, we want our stress.
I think you made that so clear for me by highlighting the distinction between stress and stressor.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're right about stress. And also we can manage our stressors and we can actually eliminate some stressors depending on how they're impacting us.
Yes.
I think that's such an important distinction to understand.
It is. But embracing your stress is, once you really start embracing your stress, you start to have a different relationship with, I have to burp. This is like, it was like a little sneaky sneak. But so when we encounter stress, if we have the resources to, even if we don't have the skills to deal with what's happening, if we have the resources of support, stress becomes exciting and innovative. And those are those feelings like when you are just getting like hit with all these tickets in the service well or on the line, and you're dancing with it. You're like, oh, hell yeah, let's go. Shake, 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 shake. I'm just crushing the day. And you're excited and it's cool and it's fun. And you're thinking like, oh my God, this is why I love this work so much. But if you don't have the resources to deal with the amount of tickets coming through, meaning if you don't have enough plates, if you don't have enough glassware, everyone's ordering mojitos. It's, and you're just like, every day you're muddling, if you don't have
Every
those.
day you're muddling.
That's where I was. Yes.
You caught that.
Yeah.
But it's a different, the stress becomes different. That's when it starts to be really bad and gross and toxic and
dangerous,
especially if it becomes chronic and like it happens all the time. And the stressors, what's causing the stress isn't addressed. We aren't building resources around it to support the stress.
Right.
So I don't want people to think that stress is bad by any means. We just need resources, be it social support, actual tools to do the job. A living wage would help, like just basic things so that when people do encounter stress, it becomes a delightful challenge that we innovate and problem solve and grow.
Yeah. So that also reminds me of the myth of multitasking. Mm-hmm. So this is something that I didn't fully understand until I heard a neuroscientist break it down. And they were basically explaining how they wanted to bust the myth of multitasking, that multitasking is a myth. And I don't think that's fully understood by most of us, and especially not in hospitality, where you were explaining this scene to me earlier, Lauren. I thought it was perfect. When you're a bartender and you have chits coming in and you have customers talking to you, waving you down, and you're also slicing lemons or limes, and you're also having to empty the glass washer, and all of these things are happening all at the same time. I think that we're encouraged to just be able to handle it all. Take it on, again, service with a smile, all that. It's bullshit because it is. And as it turns out, our brains actually don't work that way. So I heard this neuroscientist break it down for me in like a very easy kind of analogy, like your house analogy, that your focus is a flashlight and you only have one flashlight. So it's not, if you're doing 7 things at the same time, it's not like there's a flashlight on all 7 things. The flashlight is literally just task switching. Every time you change your focus from the glass washer to the customer to the lemons to the music that needs to be changed or put louder or more quiet, your brain is just like moving from one task to the next. So like 1 to 2 to 7 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. It's just constantly doing that. And in an industry where we're so normalized to multitask, even though it's not a real thing, that is exhausting and breaks us down, whether, we acknowledge this or not. And I think understanding that and being careful about how many tasks you actually are taking on simultaneously, it can be a game changer. And also, if you're in a position of leadership, that's where I think this comes into play as well. Because if you know that this is what service is like, you can design it differently for your team so that it's not one person that's handling all of that at the same time, right? Maybe you schedule it differently. Maybe you have different people doing different tasks. So you're only responsible for those tasks. You're only responsible for the other tasks. We're dividing and conquering here, and we're not putting all of this pressure on one person.
Yeah. So when it comes to multitasking in a negative light, at least, I like to make sure that as a manager, my staff is doing a good job at their job, but I don't want them to feel overwhelmed in a sense that they have to have 14 things going all at once, because we've all been in that space. And what does someone do? They always burn something. Every time. Someone always burns something. And then at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter, because then you've got to redo the task again. So what was the sense of urgency for if we couldn't even get to that point because we forgot about it, because we had 4 other things on the stovetop, we had something in the oven, there's too many things. that could go wrong. So that's why everybody at least in my workspace, they get their respective task lists, and that's what they do. They're not in charge of making sure that someone else is doing their job. You know, I have a sous chef for that. I have myself for that. There's no reason that someone should always be harping on them to move faster.
Yeah, and with that, I'll also add, like, if we promote the kind of, like, we talk about sense of urgency, when we are stressed, our stress is designed to only last a short amount of time. Like, we are not supposed to be stressed for our 17-hour double.
Exactly.
You know, like, our bodies can't sustain, like, the energy that's built up for stress. That's where we start to see adrenal fatigue. And to go for a long period of time of being mentally cloudy. I mean, we work with fire and knives and poison. Like, we really don't want to be stressed. So when we evoke things like sense of urgency,
Right.
it's really damaging because we're going to make more mistakes and we're going to be breaking down our bodies and it's going to affect our well-being. Something I like to tell people instead of sense of urgency, like I worked for a chef, great, wonderful man, but he had his little thing that was like sense of urgency. And I was like, bleh, gross, bro. It's what we want is attention,
Right.
Empathetic attention. Because if we are attentive empathetically, it creates a focus that we're looking for. We're not looking for rush. We're not looking for urgency. We're looking for focus and attention. And those are different things. Like, I even saying urgency versus attention, it does a different thing in my body as I say it. So move away from sense of urgency and really start thinking about like attention, empathy, care.
So I'm curious, Hunter and Alex, can you think of ways you can apply this in your current roles or to the hospitality industry in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're saying is kind of think of it more as a focus thing than a sense of urgency thing, that like this thing needs to be done right now, this exact way. And, you know, you just need to have a greater eye on, I guess, kind of the task at hand than just be like, you just need to do this immediately and don't ask any questions or anything like that. I think that needs to be like a total reworking of the system because, you know, I think so much of it is like, especially in a kitchen or, you know, I mean, it's when you're on a stage and people are watching you and your boss is like, yo, you're not doing anything over there. Like, I need you to have a greater sense of urgency. That's like the last thing in the world you want when you're
so unhelpful
trying to cut lemons
You're
and
right.
pull tickets out of the machine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you're right.
Also, you have all this other things you're not even allowed to bring up that are rolling around in your head at the same time. So I'm not really sure, but I think that's a really good way of looking at it is more of a focus thing than a sense of urgency thing. I don't know how you quite remove that from the fabric of the system, but I think that it's a good idea.
Yeah, with the thought of having, 17 tickets on the board, the thought of having a sense of urgency kind of goes out the window because you're just like, what can I do in this moment right now? And let me focus on the things that I can do rather than all the tickets that keep flooding in.
That's right.
Because that's never going to stop. In the restaurant industry, as much as I'd love to just... the servers put in 2 tickets at a time and then we wait, that'll never happen,
Yeah.
So it's more about figuring out what you can do and not letting the rest stress you out, which is what I try to do in my workplace.
Mm-hmm. That scene, I don't know if you all have watched The Bear yet, but that scene, it was, oh my God, that set with the 7th episode.
Yeah.
And the tickets printing. Like, I felt that whole episode in my body.
I started sweating just sitting there.
My
Like,
lower back, I was like, damn, Laura. Like, you.
I think that was one of the most accurate parts of that show was if you've ever worked in a restaurant and the machine is printing things, the stress is real.
builds.
It's like this giving me anxiety watching a TV show.
But
it's
you know
ridiculous.
what
takes
was
me
so
back.
what was so, I think, accurate about it and evocative was that you saw everyone who was in that stress space emotionally rupture. And so I think that was such a hard watch for me because having lived in that space for so long of like, it is a stress bomb in here, and no one has any sort of emotional control, and we're cruel to each other or angry with each other or whatever, like you saw that entire space just completely rupture. And I think for me, that was the most painful. And we associate the printer with that kind of damaging stress. They did a great job with that episode.
Yeah, the donut scene was really powerful. Seeing that.
Ooh, God,
Yeah.
oh yeah.
So
If you haven't watched the show, no,
won't spoil it.
Yeah.
But also watch the show.
But to your point, Laura, about, emotional rupture.
Yeah.
I think to me that leads into talking about coping.
Yes.
Because I think it is possible to have adaptive coping skills. It is possible to teach and learn different coping skills that aren't just blowing up like a volcano, yelling and throwing things, that aren't just asking people to repress and suppress their emotions, because we don't have time for that here. That isn't just substance use dependency, that isn't just like, there's so many different coping skills that I think are normalized. And then so many other helpful coping skills that no one wants to talk about or practice.
Yeah. And I want to stress, lol. Okay. That there aren't, when we talk about coping, we are constantly coping, whether we're aware of it or not. So we can be intentional with how we're coping, or it can be something that's automatically happening that we're not even aware of. And there's really not good or bad coping. What we refer to it as is adaptive or maladaptive. And adaptive is when the stressor is happening and we are adapting and growing and problem solving and innovating so that the stressor either goes away or we can live with the stressor and it's not a threat to us anymore. It doesn't feel scary to our bodies anymore. A maladaptive coping is when we just kind of shut it down. And there's really an example of probably the most prevalent example of maladaptive coping is substance use.
Yeah.
And using substances. Another form can be like compulsive exercise, that you're chasing that endorphin rush to just drown out your feelings, vegging out in front of the TV, doom scrolling on Instagram, all of these things that detach you from your feeling, what you're feeling in your emotional life, that would be maladaptive. And maladaptive, I'm going to say this very, very carefully, it's not necessarily bad. It's like on How I Met Your Mother when they're pause, when they're in a big fight and then they're pause. Sometimes we need to cope maladaptively just to continue on living. Sometimes we need to numb out and say, I'm not here for this right now. I don't have what I need in order to cope adaptively. So I'm going to press pause for a second. When it becomes a problem is when that's the only way we're coping. When we're only coping with going to the bar after work, when we're only coping by doom scrolling. It's also the difference between long-term and short-term solutions. So if we're maladaptively coping, that is a short-term fix just to get us through. Adaptively coping looks like information processing, emotional processing, problem solving, looking at structures. Why is this all going off the rails all the time? And thinking back to that episode of The Bear, if coping had happened, a lot of what coping is, it has to happen before the stressor happens, so that you are able to have and bring skills to a situation that are, so you're able to get through and cope in that moment. So you're not having that massive emotional rupture. So another thing when we talk about coping with stress and you read those listicles, they'll be and we'll talk about this too. It's nervous system regulation. It's deep breathing. It's, addressing what's happening in your body in the moment to bring you back to a place that you can actually cope. But that nervous system regulation, that going into the walk-in and taking 5, that's a short-term fix. You have to do other work that's ongoing in order to cope with that stress so that it's not volcanic.
Yeah, that's
true. If somebody finds you in the walk-in first, taking that 5 minutes until someone comes in, they're like, what are you doing in the walk-in? Sometimes you don't even get 5 minutes. Sometimes you get about 30 seconds.
Just a quick cry.
I'm so glad you said that. A quick cry, but I'm so glad you said what I've experienced as well, the shame around taking a break, the shame around needing a break. right? It's preventing us from taking care of ourselves and each other. It'd be so different if I caught you in the walk-in and said, hey man, take another 5. I got you. I'll cover whatever you got to do. Like, stay here, instead of like, what the fuck are you doing in here?
Yeah.
It's a very different.
Very different. But
We all suffer together.
we all suffer together. If I'm doing it, you're doing it. We're all doing it. And that's so unhealthy.
It's so unhealthy.
It is.
I think that's a huge issue. It's like the joint suffering. It's like, I'm not asking you to do anything I wouldn't do. It's like, should you be doing that? Should you be leading by that poor example of like, yeah, I worked 8 days in a row and there were 12-hour days, and like, I'm not asking you to do something I'm not doing. And it's like, well, neither of you should be doing that.
Yeah. Why is anyone doing that?
Oh my God, hearing you say that, I just felt myself get so mad.
Yeah. What I hear you talking about is a trauma bond.
Sure.
That happens in the workplace. There's so much of that, and it's so toxic. Well, we're going to talk about toxic workplaces in a minute.
Yeah.
But before we get there, I did want to highlight something about substance use that also isn't normalized in this industry is the conversation around harm reduction. And I think we have such a binary perspective sometimes around substances where we think it's either you're drinking all the time or you're sober. But I actually believe most of us live in the gray. I don't think most of us are in the extremes.
Yeah.
A lot of conversation that doesn't happen in this industry is around harm reduction practices that can, be provided and taught and learned and shared. And me treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of what you choose to, how you choose to interact with substances is between you.
It's a relationship.
It's a relationship that you have with substances, but it's not for me to dictate to you or shame you about whatever decisions you've made for yourself, about substances or with substances.
I've had encounters. I've had line cooks. I've had managers. I've had a lot of people go through the restaurant industry who I've worked for, I've worked with, go through these struggles. I've struggled with them myself. And it's not easy. And I think one of the biggest things for me is being able to lean on somebody not necessarily in work. Maybe you have a work buddy who's that person you lean on, that person you can talk to. It's also very helpful to have someone outside of work that you can talk to about things outside of work, because some people don't understand why you do these things. So that's why you have friends inside of work, so you can kind of like, not the greatest thing, but also trauma bonding, which is not healthy in any way, but also does help you help each other. It helps us get over things together. And someone outside of work could be there for you in the sense of just being empathetic. Someone that doesn't understand what's going on, but can see you are hurting.
Yes. And I'll throw this out there about substance use and that polarity that happens, that binary thinking of either you are a, quote, quote, raging alcoholic or you're a sober bartender, and that there's fetishizing on both sides that I think is really quite terrible. But when we only look at those extreme situations and we make it a binary thing, it means it's more challenging for us to really interrogate the nuance of our relationship and then know when, my relationship with alcohol is kind of going in a way that I'm not into, and recognizing those pre-moments. And, because it's so normal and everyone's just getting drunk anyway, that we don't have that, emotional intelligence is what that is, to recognize like, I'm descending into this place that I don't want to go. And it's an ongoing process. Like, Hassel and I were talking about it this morning, that there are periods of my life that my relationship with alcohol is not good. If you knew me in 2013, I'm so sorry, but my relationship with alcohol is in a very different place now. But it is a constant, it's like any relationship. You have to foster it and you have to be intentional about it and you have to respect it for it to really be healthy.
And get curious.
If you love it, you want to know everything about it, right?
I think it's important to get curious, not just about like the product knowledge side of alcohol and substances. I think that there's, you're going into a role now, Alex, where you're going to be diving headfirst into product knowledge of substances. And I think that's great. I'm curious what you're thinking going into this new role with this conversation that we're having.
Well, I think that it's difficult because I've always been really interested, and was never anyone in my eyes being like a heavy drinker out of like a dependency or something like that. But I am around a lot of people who are like that. But I would say my relationship with alcohol in general has not always been, I would say, super positive. 2013 was also not a great year. But, I think that's one of those things is you have to find a healthy balance between educating yourself and the things that you're interested in and not letting them consume your life as like a kind of a thing that's pushing you, like, oh, I gotta make it to the end of the day so I can have a drink. It's like I'm only having a drink out of interest or fun or celebration. It's people forget that alcohol is very dangerous, and once you cross over a line, it's very hard to kind of ever come back from that. And you can't ever enjoy a drink because you've totally taken advantage of them for far too long. And now there's no enjoyment for you. It just feels like a void in you. And it's a very scary and dangerous thing about, I think, the beverage industry, and restaurants in general is you're indulging. And then for every single person, it's a different thing, where some people can indulge their entire life and never have an issue, and somebody could indulge for a shorter period of time and their life will never be the same again, which is scary. And I think educating yourself and having things out there, like the things you're both doing is really good, because you don't know when that switch is going to turn, for yourself or one of your friends or a family member or your partner or anything like that. So,
and you're absolutely right when you say like once you cross that line, you can't go back. That's not just true behaviorally, like in your body. If your body's adapting to so much alcohol, it gets to the point that like you're changing the chemistry of how you're built, and then the relationship with alcohol, you can't go back. Like you can't. Thank you for saying all that, because that was deep. That was good.
But it's so relatable.
Yeah.
Hunter, what about you?
Perpetuating the stereotype of what it's like working in the restaurant industry is also one of the things that we should all try to dissolve. This whole, and unfortunate person who passed away, Anthony Bourdain was a very key factor in what a lot of people thought about the restaurant industry, and that we go out and party every night after we get off, and we, even on the shitty days at work, we are always drinking, and on the good days that we're working, we're going out and getting drunk or having a good time, and it needs to stop in some way, form, or fashion, or we need to find a way to talk about it like we are now. Talk about the things that are continuing that need to maybe not stop. We all like to have a good time, but doing it more healthy.
Can I ask you, as a manager who has a team that probably goes out after their shift at the end of the night, what are some things, and I'm putting you on the spot completely, what are some things that you can think of that you could do so that people aren't falling into that pattern? Like, what can happen from a workplace perspective?
I think as the manager, I have a lot of influence on what my team should think about doing. So, on a good night, I'm like, guys, let's have a round, it's on me. But if we've had a bad night, there's no reason to wallow in it with a drink, I like celebrating. We just crushed 400 covers. We're all a little tired, but we did it. We made it out of it. Look at us go, how can we do it better? We sit down, we talk about it. We talk about the things that could be stressful, that could be easier from either my end or their end, and just not doing it, like you said, as a manager, I like to put my influence in how I do things. And if I'm not drinking, my team's looking up at me like, all right, maybe, chef's not having a beer. Why do we need a beer? He's been here all day. Why are we doing this?
You are spot on about that influence thing too, because you don't have to be like the manager in a space to have influence. Like informal leaders have so much power in a space. There was this really cool study around psychological safety that happened on a sports team. And I like to read a lot about sports psychology because it's very similar to the hospitality industry. It's like, a short period of time, there's a performance element involved. It's a very team-oriented thing. So it's a cool area to study and then recontextualize. But this study found that it was the informal leaders who created who were creating the conditions for psychological safety that had the most power. So it wasn't coach, it wasn't, even the team captain. It was the individual that had influence. Actually, the researcher is a Canadian dude, by the way. But it's the person that has influence informally is really the one setting the tone for what the culture is. And that's something to think about. So like, even if you're listening to this and you're not a manager, but you have influence over your space, you have a responsibility to say, maybe we don't go to this bar down the way and drink 12 Cosmos.
Well, I think, like Hunter, you were describing celebrating one way. Would you be open to the idea of celebrating a variety of different ways, like offering options?
Yeah. And there's always the option of like, I have some coworkers that don't drink,
right?
And that's fine. I think another thing is like the peer pressure is always still out there, no matter what, no matter how old we get. It's
true.
like, we're not 16 anymore. Stop trying to have me drink a beer.
Oh God.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Feel that.
I don't want it, And it's always healthy. I never let anybody overconsume. That's never healthy. No matter how great this shift was, there's no reason we should have more than one. It's a good job, pat on the back type thing. But you're right. There's a variety of different things. We could celebrate with ice cream. I know how simple that sounds, but you know what gets a line cook really perked up? An ice cream sandwich.
Yes. Yes.
There's a lot of things, the nostalgia sells. Nostalgia makes you feel things.
Yeah.
And an ice cream sandwich, it's like, come on. That doesn't make your heart, move a little bit when you just think about it?
Now.
Me too.
See?
Did you bring any?
I wish.
No, but you make such a good point. Like, I just had COVID for the first time, and I bought a bunch of popsicles because my throat hurt. And can I tell you, I was like, this is joy on a stick. This is amazing. And so we start to see alcohol also as a form of currency, as a treat, something that you've earned. And that's incredibly problematic, especially looking at you, Alex, when you work in wine and you're constantly working with the product. And one of the quote, quote, work perks is that you have your samples at the end of the night. Then it becomes, this is a supplement to how I'm being paid. And it changes the relationship, and you start to drink more because you're like, this is my income. Oh, I need to work with this brand because part of my income is now going to visit the distillery in Mexico. It can really get things more and this is a more complicated relation with alcohol than, let's say, an attorney has, because the alcohol isn't a form of their compensation. It's not social currency either in the same way. You don't give free shots to people you hate. Unless it's Malort. That's not true. I gave Hassel Malort the other day.
You came to Chicago, so.
It happened.
She was like, it's so smooth. I was like, what the fuck?
I want to meet this person.
Yeah, no Malort
It
face.
changed quickly.
It does. Yes, it does. Anyway.
What were you going to say, though, Alex?
No, I think that, I've never really thought of it like that. But it's interesting to think about after you brought it up, where it is very much, the Fernet rep or, the Casamigos rep, whatever it may be. It's like, they are drinking a lot of times and going out and being like, oh, try this and this and this. And it is like a slippery slope of an industry where, it's almost setting you up to overindulge which is, again, worrisome. I don't know how you really, change that with the way everything is kind of set up, where it's great when you have these people that come into the restaurant and they spend money and they support your restaurant and all this, but it's just kind of pouring like more and more sponsorship and people wanting to get you to drink their thing. And it's, hey, come out, I'll pay for all your drinks tonight. It's kind of difficult, I think, to do that in a healthy way. I don't know if there is a healthy way to promote liquor and wine and beer, and food is less. You can only eat so many hot dogs. You're not going to hurt yourself too bad, but too many drinks and that side of it is very dangerous. So I think it's more changing the culture of also how these companies and things like that are promoting their products and giving them away. I gave all my sample bottles away, in case you were wondering.
Yeah.
Because I have no shortage of people in my life. They're like, oh, you like wine? Do you have some wine for me? I'm like, yes, I do. I have a bunch of wine that I don't want and don't need because, like I said, for me, I'm not like craving a drink at the end of the day. And I don't even want that to be part of any like lifestyle that I live is going home and cracking open all my sample bottles and like drinking them all to the last drop.
Yep.
Yeah. And I know people who do that, and it's scary and it sucks. So I think you have to kind of change a lot of that in the way liquor and wine and beer are introduced and sold and sponsored and
and that's a
commercial.
big hairy conversation that I want to have someday.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
I think it requires a lot of creativity and innovation.
Yeah.
Like doing things a different way, basically. I think we rely too heavily on this industry on the way it's always been. This is the way we've always done it. Tradition and enforcing that you do your job the way your former colleague or your boss or whoever did this job 1 year ago, 10 years ago used to do it. I think what's missing is a lot of input from, new perspectives. How can we get creative? How can we do this differently? Because I don't think there's any benefit in villainizing alcohol. It's not the villain. It's our relationship with it, how we interact with it. Also, let's be real, it's not going anywhere.
No.
We're never going to not have this as part of our industry. So I think it's just about getting creative.
I agree.
I mean, I think a lot of what you said is like, is there a safe space for, anything in moderation is good and it can be okay at least, but when you have no safe space before you come to work, at work, in your industry, in any avenues to talk about the issues that's going on in your life, there's plenty of distractions to negative ones that can really pour on. And that's, for me, after working in a restaurant for so long and not having to go to work the last few days because I'm newly unemployed from restaurants, it was like, wow, there's a whole layer of stress like that is removed from my entire life, where I'm not waking up and being like, oh man, I have all these things I need to do today. And like, also the added element of like, somebody's probably going to tell me to fuck off today at some point. Probably an employee and at least like 2 guests. And they're going to be like, yo, why isn't there lettuce on my burger? You're literally ruining my life.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
What an
whoa.
ordeal.
It's like,
So real. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do is go see friends at restaurants. And I feel like a lot of times a lot of people will bring like a bottle of booze and, all these snacks. And like, I kind of stopped this a few years ago where if I do go see my friends at restaurants, the only thing I bring is as many candy bars as I can hold in my hands, chips and Gatorade, because what do you want during a shift besides a Gatorade? Like And if you want to drink, you're working at a restaurant. I know you can find avenues of alcohol if you want it. I'm trying to have everybody in a good mood, have everybody on good morale. You know, like table 104 just brought in a whole bag of snacks and candy bars. Like, this is awesome. You know, just brighten somebody's day, especially in the kitchen. And, you know, front of house usually gets some snacks too. The busboy will come by and be like, thanks for the Gatorade, man. And so it's a good time, you know, and I think just taking that, just one more aspect out of like pushing that just alcohol in general, just trying to push it upon people when they don't want it.
Yeah.
So I think we have like 10 minutes before we wrap up.
Is there anything you guys wanted to jump into?
Well, we did want to discuss a little bit toxic workspaces. And I'll be real, I'm a little apprehensive to get started, and I don't want this edited out because it is a big topic, and I don't want to open something that we can't really tend to. So I think what we'll do instead then is talk a little bit about the five pillars of toxic workspaces.
And the antidotes, or no?
Yeah, let's antidote it. We're gonna forget everything I just said. We're just gonna do it, and I think that we can. So, toxic workspaces. Charles and Donald Soll recently did a lot of work around. It was qualitative work using Glassdoor. Glassdoor is a website that does reviews of employers and workplaces.
I'm curious. Have either of you heard of Glassdoor?
No.
So, yes.
Okay, we have this theory that our industry has no clue this exists. You know what I'm talking about. But a lot of hospitality workers have never heard
Yeah, of Glassdoor.
So maybe talk about what it is.
It's a website that you will anonymously say, this is what I made, this was my experience. So if you're someone who is like applying for a job, you can go to Glassdoor and see what people have to say about working there. And it gives you, right?
You can also see pay transparency.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. Of like, you know, and sometimes people are really kind and they're like, if you work here, be prepared for this, 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 and this. It's like not super terrible. So anyway, they did some qualitative work, and they used a lot of AI that they poured through all of these different reviews from different industries, workplaces, and everything. And they coded it, meaning they found themes in what people were saying when they left. And they found that there were 5 main themes that defined toxicity in the workplace. And that was cutthroat, non-inclusive. Oh my God, my iPad closed.
Abusive, unethical, and disrespectful.
Yeah. Those are the themes. And it's cool because now we can look at those 5 sort of pillars of toxicity and say, okay, what's the opposite of that?
But also, I think once you can define something like, okay, let's be real. We've worked in hospitality. We've thrown this word around a million times. This place is so toxic. That person's so toxic. But we've never had like a specific definition, right? For what makes this toxic. So when they scrape this data, I think for me, not only are you helping me define it, because now if I notice unethical behavior, if I notice abusive behavior happening in the work environment, I know this is elements of a toxic workplace. Also, now we can measure.
We can measure it. So I also want to point out with these 5 things that, and I recommend if you're listening, you too, but if you're listening at home, the episode of the Dare to Lead podcast with Brene Brown with Charles and Donald Soll, their father and son duo, definitely worth a listen because they go further deep into it. And I really encourage you all to learn more about this because these things like abusive, cutthroat, these are normalized, not just normalized, but glorified in the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
So we're glorifying and building off cultures of toxicity. And then we're saying like, let's give them a Michelin star, you know? And it's a huge problem. But if we can recognize more broadly in this industry that like non-inclusive, if you aren't creating systems, and I'm not talking about doing a DE&I seminar. I'm talking about looking at your systems, finding where people are excluded and don't feel like they belong. If you're not really addressing that with a plan and with measurable results, you are complicit in that toxicity then.
That's right.
It is not something to look at as some topical temporary Instagram post thing. It has to be deep in the bones of how you're doing it. Otherwise, you are building toxicity.
I would take it even further and say you have to have a plan for how you're building in inequity.
Yeah.
In how you manage, in how you interact with the industry. You need to, it needs to be a conscious strategy, just like you would have a strategy for sales, marketing, promotion, menus. How are they designed? There's strategies. There's a supply chain. Why did we choose the suppliers we work with? There's a thought there. You're proactive about it. You're not just reactive, right?
Yes.
When you're building a business. What's missing for me is the lack of the same effort and strategy put towards being anti-racist, being, equitable, and getting rid of the inequities around ableism, racism, misogyny, and making sure that we're paying attention to who is in the room and who's not in the room, who has a voice and who doesn't have a voice, who's here and who's not here, and why. Right. And what can we do to include more voices and center the voices of those most affected? Because I think oftentimes we make decisions as leaders, managers, or even just employees that are centered around our own lived experience. And that's it. We're only taking our own lived experience. And so then we're moving with assumptions that are really just real for us as individuals and not checking in with the rest of our industry to better understand what they're experiencing, what they need, what their wants are. And it creates toxicity.
And I want to highlight with that when we talk about what the dimensions are of mental health, of what impacts our mental health, that is a big piece of belonging, of am I able to contribute? Am I given space to contribute? That's why I say DE&I conversations are mental health conversations, and they have to be. But it's looking around and really being honest about who is here and who is not here, and what am I doing today, tomorrow, the next day to make it so that more and more people feel like they absolutely belong. They're not trying to fit in. They're not code switching. They're not fracturing bits of themselves off so that they can fit into a culture. How do we create a system, and it's going to be different in each place, so that people who want to work here are building the culture, because the culture is built around them and who they are and what they need, and that feedback is welcome and innovation from everyone is welcome. It becomes a much larger conversation that then it's no longer an isolated single seminar in a place to address something. It really has to become part of the entire.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I don't want to get.
What's a major barrier, do you think, that prevents that kind of change? Or because I know people, when you say it out loud, you're like, yeah, that sounds great. I'm all for that.
How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, how do you do that, or how do you tackle the institutions that are preventing that? Because it's keeping the status quo. I think in every industry is the ideal thing for the leaders of the industry, at least, financially or whatever it may be. But I don't know what if you've come across anything or seen anything that helps.
We always think that we are changing things or we want to change things, but do you guys have any specific examples to help us figure out how we should be changing things?
I think developing ways that you can collect as much feedback from your team as possible, even just practicing giving feedback and accepting feedback, is a huge deal. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. You know, it could just be like, I mean, look at Ted Lasso. He's like, here's a suggestion box. Like, you know, it can be something like that, but it could be a post-shift processing. That, is there anything that we need to know? You can do anonymous things of like, tell me about your shift today. How did you feel? Even like when I clock out tonight, I get to say, I was angry today. I'm leaving this shift feeling very tired, or I feel really good. You know, different systems of reporting like that. The more people can have input into what happens in the space, the better. If you rely on one or two people to make all the decisions for the space, not only is it incredibly unfair, and that's when you have people who are working like 17-hour days all the time because they can't delegate and they don't have space to delegate. It's also just dangerous because then, like Hassel mentioned, it's only one person's perspective that's only bringing their stuff into it without consideration of other people in the same way. So it can look like asking a different question every day to everybody. It can look like a manager coming forward and being like, I want to get better at giving and receiving feedback. So I would like, if you are willing to practice with me, what ideas do you have? Or like, if you're ready and brave, how do you think our relationship is? Can we talk about that? And being, you know, the other thing about feedback too, is that you can't just bring the feedback in and then not do anything with it. It actually has to be acted upon is the other piece. And if it can't be acted upon, that has to be communicated as well. And why? You know, otherwise people are just going to be like, God, they really suck. But it could be, we hear you and we like this idea. We're into this. We have to reformulate the budget so that we can work this in a little bit more. But this is our 2-year plan. You know, that's the action. It doesn't necessarily have to happen, but you have to put a plan in place and then live it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, please.
That's funny that you say these things. I've just had a line cook or a whole back house meeting not that long ago and did that. I had everybody fill out what works and what doesn't work for everybody. And, you know, we talked as a group. It was a group discussion because a lot of these people don't even see each other.
Exactly.
You know, you've got the AM crew, you've got the PM crew, you've got the mid shifts, you know, so a lot of people aren't even seeing each other. So we've got the AM crew like, oh, I want that. I want the PM crew to do this. The PM crew saying the opposite, you know. So there's a lot of there's a lot of like back and forth, but also very constructive things being said and talked about, and things that actionable items that we did talk about that I can change on my side and the employees can change on their side. And I think that conversation is definitely very helpful. I think it was aired out. We could say, how everybody felt. And I think that's very, you know, a lot of people are afraid to show their emotions at work, like this whole podcast is about. And I think that allowing people to be emotionally available in whatever way, sense, or form they need to be to show that they care. You know, a lot of these people that are in the industry love it. You know, I love the industry.
Same.
I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. But if there's not the ability to show and say how you feel about certain things, you get shut down. You're told no. When you try to explain yourself and people aren't listening, you know, it's very hard to swallow that pill and just move on with the rest of your day, especially when it's just so hard. You know, I love it, but that doesn't make it any easier than it already is, you know.
I'd like to take a moment just to highlight something that you said that made me think of once I provided some feedback to this group, this organization, and they kept saying to me, we just want to make sure that you feel heard. We want to make sure that you feel heard.
I hate that.
And I was like, fuck you. I want you to hear me. I don't want to feel heard. I want you to hear me. Yeah. And I want you to internalize it. And I want you to do something about it. And it was a very well-intentioned, if you will. I don't actually think it was. I think I was trying to dismiss me. But not getting mad about it now or anything. It was not like it was years ago. Wow. Take a breath, Laura. But there is a difference. It's not about feeling heard. It's about actually hearing someone and saying, I hear you, and this is what I'm going to do about it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to hear from you because I know you were trying to...
No. I mean, what you just said is I had a very real life scenario with that recently where I was in a meeting and they were discussing some like inequity in like a tip out structure kind of situation. And which to me is always the most... it's always an interesting conversation because for me, I'm like, I would rather everybody just like split it evenly. But, you know, I know different places are different. But someone in the meeting had brought up like, okay, well, this is not fair structure, so we need to change it. And they're like, well, this isn't really going to change the dollar amount everybody's going to get, but it's going to make it... No, they know now that we care and we're trying to change it. And I'm like, that's literally useless. You're doing them a disservice.
Yes.
And it's like, it's even if it's a harder conversation and we have to be like, yo, one group of people in this scenario is going to make less money, so it's more fair for everyone. And instead of like attacking that conversation and like taking that, it's like, well, we're just going to make the perception that we care about you and that you're going to make no significant amount more money. But like, we're listening to you and like, this is what we've decided is the solution. And it's like, you know, and I am not really sure, you know, why people do that, where it's like, you know, perception is cool, but it's not helping anyone.
Yeah, I think a big thing to focus on, like to your earlier questions of like what can be done, is definitely around creating systems of feedback, like you were saying, Laura, anonymous surveys, not just telling people that you're trying to hear them, but actually doing something about whatever it is that they're sharing. And like you said, put a plan in place. But overall, I think it's really about disrupting the way the industry currently is. I think if you're doing things the way it's been done, don't.
Yeah.
So like literally take a very disruptive approach to everything you do, and a proactive approach, not a reactive approach. So if you catch yourself just adopting what you experienced when you were, you know, first starting out, don't. Like you have to constantly be role modeling that disruption for everyone around you. And calling yourself in, calling yourself out. Constantly. Like literally daily. I have to constantly do this. I'm every day asking myself what am I doing today towards my unlearning? Because I believe we've all been conditioned by this industry and we're all complicit in the harm that exists and in upholding the systems that are currently in place. So what are we doing every single day to unlearn and to disrupt constantly? And that's hard. It's not easy. And you're going to make mistakes. We're stumbling through this as we're stumbling through this conversation and, you know, this podcast takeover. We're going to wrap up.
I do want to say one thing.
Okay.
To answer your question in a different way. I'm going to quote my friend Angela Howard. She talks a lot about the syndrome of the add-on, that in order to fix something, we have to add something, that we have to, you know, give a shift drink. We have to like add things. When really, when we're addressing culture stuff, it needs to be what we need to dive in, not pile on top. It's like painting over a dead insect in an apartment and calling it clean. We have to clean up. So with that, I'll say, don't do the add-on, self-interrogate, get deep.
I thank you, Alex
yes,
and
thank
Hunter, for joining us in this brave, difficult conversation.
Yes.
And Laura for being my co-host. And of
angel.
course to Blind Barber Chicago
Thank you, Blind
for
Barber
hosting
Chicago.
us. This space is amazing. I want to live here. Can I move in? And
Also, thank you to Athletic Brewing. Like, I love you all. Thank you. I love your beers so much. They're out of Connecticut. They're non-alcoholic. They taste really good. I love drinking them at the end of my day. Like, thank you for the support and the drinks. And also, thank you to Terms of Service for letting us hijack,
Thanks.
hijack this
Thank you,
situation.
Nariba,
We
and
love
Justin
you.
for having us and hosting us. And thank you to everyone who's listening.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for having us here.
Thank you for having us, and keep up the good work.
That was fun.